You're listening to Thunderquack Podcast Network.
Hi, this is Ralph Macchio, and you are listening to the Epic Marvel Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the Epic Marvel Podcast. This is Daredevil, episode 13A, A Touch of Typhoid, covering a period of Daredevil from April 1988 to November 1988. I am your host, Kurtis Findlay.
And I am Adam Chapman, your Daredevil co-host.
And Adam, which issues are we talking about today?
So in particular, we're talking about Daredevil number 253 to 260 and Punisher number 10.
Yeah, so if you are following along with these Daredevil episodes, we are covering the Epic Collections, and this is Epic Collection number 13, called A Touch of Typhoid. We are splitting this down the middle, so we're going to talk about half of it this week and half of it next week. And then following that, after that, we'll jump right into Volume 14, which covers some more of the Nocenti run. Now, Adam, are these favorite? Is this a favorite period of Daredevil for you?
I have no idea. I've read it multiple times. I'm still not sure how I feel about it at times. It's interesting to say the least. It's interesting when you said it's from 1988. I was like, man, I'm glad I wasn't a 5-year-old flipping through these issues because they are not for a 5-year-old.
They really aren't. There's some dark, heavy, and inappropriate stuff through these. I was quite surprised because I think people compare Daredevil to Spider-Man a lot, right? Because, you know, he's more on the ground level of New York. He's a solo character. He swings through the city or whatever and has his rogues gallery, deals with the Kingpin. But it's like Spider-Man, but on the underground, in the seedy underbelly, where terrible stuff happens. It's so different.
Oh yeah, for sure. A lot of bad stuff happened. I mean, It is definitely Nocenti writing her heart out, and this is the stuff that matters to her. And there's certain political leanings that she's not hiding them. Yep. In terms of how, this is probably the most political that Daredevil has ever been in terms of how they kind of approach certain things. And with a character like Daredevil, you could do that easily because you are dealing with the law and what the law means at different times throughout the decades. And this is a very particular period during the 80s and how people are feeling and the cynicism that was kind of in America at the time. But yeah, she definitely writes it on her sleeve, and it's very apparent where she's coming down on. But it does kind of fit this in and around the character. Although I did feel like the first few issues of this particular volume, Matt feels odd and like it's harder. If you think about how close this is to Born Again was not that long ago. This is maybe a year and a half after Born Again.
Right.
But the character feels far removed from there and much more confident. But then we start to break him down and take him apart. So I feel like he starts to feel more like Matt as the run goes on, as even though he does some very uncharacteristic things. And that's interesting too, that at times you don't really like Matt here. Like, He's not a great guy. And that's kind of a bold move to make because for the most part, Matt had been a good guy. There was periods in Frank Miller's one where he did some, shadier stuff in his relationships, but, for the most part, he felt like a good guy, or at least was driven by a moral good. And here, it's starting to feel a little murkier.
But he's being manipulated, though, to do the bad thing.
He is, but he is definitely being manipulated. But it's just hard because how long does the manipulation really stay with him? And it's just hard to read at times. It's not like he hasn't done bad things in the past or in the future, but it's always difficult to read because it's your hero. You want to root for him.
Yeah.
Spider-Man typically doesn't do bad things. He screws up, but he doesn't really do bad things through in any kind of intent. Whereas here we have a different focus. But it's, again, Nocenti is really trying to peel away at what masculinity was like in the 80s, how people would manipulate each other, how people treated women and sex. It's a really interesting, intricate way of looking at things and how she's trying to peel apart what society actually looked like. And Typhoid Mary is fascinating as a character because, she's able to weaponize sexuality in a way that, we hadn't really seen, I guess, because like even Elektra, who's like a sexual character, she never used her sexuality to do anything.
Right.
She just happened to be sexy, happened to be a femme fatale. Whereas Typhoid Mary is completely different.
Yep, yeah, and that's where the manipulation comes in. I think Typhoid Mary is an absolutely fascinating character, and that's definitely the highlight of these issues. Is her. I loved also the way that she was portrayed in the Daredevil Netflix series. I thought that was very cool also. And they play a lot with the same themes there. You mentioned the cynicism of the era in the 80s here. We're smack dab in the middle of the final chapter of the Cold War in 1988. The U.S. and Russia are stockpiling their nuclear weapons, and this is what we see this come out in a number of different ways in this volume as well, and that's covering the politics of the era. That's covering the news and everything that's going on in the world. So people who were reading this at the time would have been very, very familiar with just the uneasiness and the anxiety that the world was feeling at the time, because is Russia going to start a nuclear war or not? That kind of thing. So, and we get to feel a lot of it, and that kind of drives a lot of the motivations, I think, of some of these characters in this book as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, so right before we go on, I have some listener comments. We got a lot of comments about this volume, so I'm going to do some of the comments now, and I'll do some of the comments in the next episode, so we'll have a little bit to talk about. So I went over to Instagram, and here's what people say on Instagram. Patrick says, after Miller's Born Again arc, it seemed that no one knew what to do with Daredevil. At the end of Born Again, Miller really set up Daredevil to be a totally different book than it was before. Matt Murdock was basically dead, and he wasn't playing the part of a blind man. He had Karen back, and no one really knew what to do with him. The book really lacked a vision for a year or two until Ann Nocenti came on. She reset up the status quo with Daredevil as Murdock, blind and a lawyer again. She sets up conflicts for Matt, like Foggy unknowingly working for the Kingpin, and Matt, and set it up to pull it back down at the end of the Typhoid Mary saga. Yeah, it's very true. I think a lot of this beginning part is kind of setting him back on track. He's building up his life again in order to tear it down. And that's kind of what most writers will do, is they'll position their hero on a high level in order to knock him off, because that's interesting storytelling, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a very classic trope, right? But it feels like Daredevil goes through that more than most. That's
true. There's constantly this fall from grace going on.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. Someone by the handle Cool Covers says, I think Marvel should value more of this run. Nocenti and JR and Williamson need more reprints. That is true. These two Epic collections that reprint the Nocenti issues came out fairly early in the Epic collection run, and we still haven't got the beginning, nor have we got the end of Nocenti's run. We just have these two volumes right in the middle, still missing a bunch.
Yeah.
SD Rum says, huge Typhoid Mary fan. Nocenti's work is amazing, including the first 4 issues of Typhoid under Marvel Edge for mature readers. And those issues are collected in a book called Daredevil Typhoid's Kiss.
That's right.
The comic book Heel says, currently the best Daredevil epic for sure. This one. Until they decide to put out the Miller, Bendis, Brubaker, Wade stuff. And let's see, another one says, Guy Eccentric says, one of my top 5 epics. That's saying a lot there. Top 5. Nocenti's run is very underrated, and this gives a good example. As for Mary, I appreciate Nocenti's efforts to bulk up the Rogues Gallery, but the Devil connection was a bit weird. Maybe I missed something. We'll get to that in our next episode, not in this episode. Yeah. So I think that's all the comments we have for today. And we'll get to some more comments next time we talk about the second half of this volume. But in the meantime, why don't we talk about this volume? What are the things we need to know about this period of Daredevil before jumping into this volume?
All right. Well, Kingpin knows who Matt Murdock is, that he's Daredevil. He's a little obsessed with it and tearing him down. During Born Again, Matt Murdock theoretically lost everything. He lost his practice, his ability to practice law. His home was blown up, but now he is kind of recovered. He's on his feet. He's living with Karen Page, who's now back in his life as his full-time girlfriend. They're living together relatively happy, at least at the beginning of this volume. He's running a free clinic to help people with legal aid, and that's basically where he is. So he's got a new kind of supporting cast. He's trying to help people. There's this young child who was recently blinded, so he's trying to help him and help his legal case, which obviously has to involve the Kingpin as well, working behind the scenes. And and Foggy Nelson is, working for a big firm, and he's no longer, kind of the little guy. He's the big guy now.
Okay, yeah, I think that's pretty much all you need to know. Yeah, the stuff about the shelter and Tyrone, the little blind boy, plays heavy into these first few issues, and then they kind of disappear and get sent to the sidelines. So it's only really these first few issues, and this is something that Nocenti has been building up since the beginning of her run, right?
Absolutely. And again, the whole idea of how, Daredevil realizing he can't actually, practice law, but maybe he can still use his legal expertise to help and coach others, to, give them proper legal aid so that he can still help and give back. So, it's very much in keeping with the character and trying to find a way. And it's actually a very inventive way for the writers to find a way to still have him doing what he's good at, but not the way he did it before. And he's having to accommodate, not operating at the same level, not having any prestige, operating at a very different level, but still being able to do what he loves.
Yeah. The first issue in this book is Daredevil number 253. It's called Merry Christmas, Kingpin. And Daredevil takes down a couple of crooks on Christmas Eve that are just kind of running amok. And in the background, Kingpin ponders how to destroy Matt Murdock. Now, one of the things that I liked about this issue is obviously it's a Christmas issue. I really enjoy these Christmas issues. We don't really get them, I think, in Marvel these days because the way they structure their story arcs, it's like a year kind of, they don't really follow the normal calendar year anymore. But
no, they don't.
You could almost count on a few titles every single year having cool little Christmas episodes. And I remember especially the one in Spider-Man where they get kicked out of their apartment. That's the Todd McFarlane era. And there's the Fantastic Four. There's a Fantastic Four story. Actually, that might have been in one of the holiday specials. But anyway, I like these Christmas ones. And this one is interesting because they really, I think, play with Scrooge, like Ebenezer Scrooge and Kingpin, like the parallels between those two characters. And, Scrooge obviously has a change of heart at the end of that book or that movie, and Kingpin does not. But it's still talking about the same sort of that high, lofty position where they think that they're above everybody else. They're concerned with their own dealings and their wealth and look down on people, and Kingpin fits that bill.
It's interesting, actually, to bring up Scrooge. I was thinking more parallels with the Grinch, especially at the end where you have the Kingpin kind of summarizing everything they've lost. And instead of his heart growing bigger, he just gets smaller.
He buckles down, yeah, right.
But it's interesting because you almost want to write it off as just kind of being this one-off. But so this particular issue is the crux of everything that comes from this. Everything that with Typhoid Mary all comes from the Kingpin really making the realization that in order to truly destroy Murdock, because he thought he did it before, is that he really has to grab his heart. He has to strike him right through the heart, and that's the only way he's ever going to win. I guess maybe he wants to be freed of his obsession and have it be done. Like, it's interesting that he did everything that he thought he could do. Thought he destroyed the man. Thought he killed him, and it still wasn't enough. And so he's like, what can I possibly do that's still left? Because otherwise he's always going to be haunted by the fact that he can't get rid of this foe. And so this is where he kind of launches into his new assault. I'm going to take apart his heart. I
love the parallel on page 16 where Kingpin is trying to swat a fly with a barbell. This fly is buzzing around his head and bothering him. And it's like, yeah, Kingpin can deal with huge organizations. He can deal with massive things like underground crime, because he is a monster force as well. Monster forces can attack monster forces, but they are not good at taking care of tiny little problems, and that's what Daredevil is to him. it just buzzing around and causing an annoyance. I liked that. There's interesting writing in this. Nocenti uses no narration throughout this entire issue, except for the very beginning little dialogue boxes to set the scene. But once we pass that, everything is done. Oh, I guess there's a little bit introducing Daredevil on page 8. But everything after that is done through words and through talking and thinking. And even like scene changes, we don't get any like later in Kingpin's office or anything like that, or meanwhile, or we don't get any of that kind of stuff. It just goes from scene to scene to scene. It feels very much like a movie in that sense, where it's just like one thing ends and it goes right on to the next thing. I thought that was very interesting, and it's not something that she does in the other issues. So this is definitely specific to the storytelling here.
Yeah, and it wouldn't have been common to the period either. I mean, this is the period of narration boxes. So it definitely makes the issue stand out. It's curious why it's this particular issue. I mean, I guess so much of the rest of it, she really has to use context and really use it more strongly because a lot of things will be happening without without there being a simple way to verbalize it or even thought bubble it. Whereas here, it's a lot simpler, and you can the key changes or the scene changes are so drastic that, again, you can do that pretty easily without there being too much hand-holding for the reader. But it's still an interesting thing to point out.
There are a couple of devices, visual devices, that are used to change the scene. Like if you go to page 22, there's the scene where 8-Ball, the kid, gives his skateboard to, what's her name, Darla?
Yep.
And then the very bottom panel, we have a scene change right to Kingpin sitting at his boardroom table, but the panel is smaller and inset. And so that is to indicate a scene change instead of having a word box.
Yeah, it is also interesting that Kingpin doesn't want to talk about Christmas.
Yeah, it's like Ebenezer Scrooge.
Yeah,
he even makes his guy work on Christmas, just like he does with Bob Cratchit.
Yeah, I don't really like the Wild Boys. Found them as the villains here to be very like, okay. And I also didn't really. I guess the story with 8-Ball was all right. 8-Ball's a weird character, kind of floats in and out. A bunch of the kids are. That I think there's more often than not, they're just mouthpieces for journalizing maybe thoughts that Nocenti was having. They're very political usually, or very cynical. And I guess maybe that's why she uses kids who should be optimistic to be the cynical ones. But again, there's so much cynicism in this volume. You feel like you need a bath afterwards. Like there's just everything everything's gross and disgusting, and I guess that's the point. And it's funny too because you hear about the New York of the 70s and 80s, which is obviously not the New York that exists now in terms of crime and corruption, that kind of stuff. But here it's like a different world.
Well, you say the cynicism and stuff, but 8-Ball really learns something here. Like he gives up his skateboard to Darla in a very touching moment.
I'm thinking more in like later issues too. But like he definitely starts, and like even the kid, even Darla, was like, I'm gonna have to steal that. I'm like, whoa, like that's instead of being like, oh, I really wish I had that. You're immediately making the jump to, I should steal that. I was like, whoa, that's a big jump.
Yeah, and Darla later on, when Darla stumbles across Matt and Mary together, I think there's a lot going on here that really jades these children. We can see that they come up from a like bad upbringing and have a very very jaded look at the way the world works. But they're friends with Daredevil, and they want to help him. Like they're the youth of tomorrow, so they want to make the world a better place in a sense as well. But they understand how awful it is at the same time.
What's interesting as well about Daredevil is that his open relationship with the police almost seems like so crazy. Like here especially, like they're just letting him do stuff. Like okay, like, and we kind of seen it in like even Frank Miller's version of Daredevil. There was more of a cop presence as well. He definitely was having discussions with the police, etc. It's just so weird to see because in the same era you have Spider-Man like hunted by police, but you have Daredevil just chilling with them and basically being like their Batman.
I want to point out the last 3 panels of this issue, and then we can go on to the next thing. Kingpin sitting in his limousine. He decides that he's going to attack Murdock in a different way. And then there's this panhandler at the very end reaching into the limo, and he says, "Merry Christmas, mister. Got a buck? Hey, man, it's Christmas, for heaven's sakes. A quarter? Hey, buddy, a dime?" It's kind of a weird way to end this.
It is.
But it's a contrast between the powerful rich elite and the down and out. And there was a song that was made famous in 1932 by Bing Crosby called "Brother, Can You Spare a Dime," which I'm sure this last panel is referencing here, because he says "buddy" and "dime" in the same sentence. And that song was all about a man who was trying to live the American dream of, his own business, his own house, his family, whatever, being independently wealthy and whatever, and then it never happens and he loses everything, and now he's forced to panhandle. And that became an anthem. It was written before the Great Depression, but it became an anthem for people in the Great Depression, because so many people lost so much during that time. And that is a major theme that Ann Nocenti plays with throughout her run here, is the people who are not able to achieve that American dream, the people who are in the gutter, who society casts off and forgets about. And that's exactly what we're seeing here with Kingpin in these last three panels. Kingpin doesn't acknowledge this guy at all. He doesn't speak to him. He doesn't give him any money. He doesn't even say, "Go away." He just pretends that he doesn't exist.
Well, let's be honest. He probably had the man killed right afterwards.
Yes, possible.
That's why there's not a fourth panel. He's dead now.
Yeah, right. Okay, let's keep on going over to number 254. Do you want to take this one, Adam?
I will. Just one last thing about 253. I did like the juxtaposition, especially the way that it's in the Epic Collection, because you have the cover right next to the first opening page, and I like that it's Merry Christmas Daredevil and then it's Merry Christmas Kingpin. It's just a nice little. It's just visually the way it pops on for us. It wouldn't have popped this way, obviously, for someone picking up the issue, because they wouldn't have had the two pages juxtaposition to each other. But I just like that.
We have the juxtaposition of opening it up and seeing the first page would say Merry Christmas Kingpin in that sense.
That's true. So let's go on to 254. So this is the big one. This is the first appearance of Typhoid Mary. And even like the cover is very striking. Immediately kind of sets up, this mysterious woman, as well as like the fires, the flames. It's interesting me going back to this and seeing just how fully realized as a character she was right from the get-go.
Oh yeah.
In terms of her powers, the pyrokinetic, it's all there. She comes fully realized onto the page. She didn't need further kind of refinements to kind of develop who she was going to be. She's not like a Black Cat who took a lot of revisions to kind of feel like the Black Cat we ended up getting later, whereas Typhoid Mary explodes onto the page the way she's meant to be.
Yeah, and every person who's dealt with Typhoid Mary since then has been very, very faithful to this original interpretation right here, this original iteration.
Yeah, so I mean, it's the most 80s design you can imagine for a female villain, though.
Yeah. I love it. The huge hair, the hairspray, the big 80s punk rock kind of look.
Like the amount of work it would take to get her look down and then go back to being Mary Walker is mind-boggling.
Yeah, I know. There's one scene where she is Mary and then she fluffs up her hair and all of a sudden it looks like this. And she says, "Oh, it's just good to fluff up my hair." It's like, no, that takes more work than that, I'm pretty sure.
It's the magic of comics.
That's right.
So, I mean, right from the beginning, like you have her, again, wearing like, armored shoulder pads. Like it's kind of nuts. One arm is covered, one arm isn't. She's got the, double blades. She's got scabbards by her side. She's got the ripped fishnets. Like it's, if you could close your eyes and imagine a more 80s female villain, I don't think you could come up with one. But again, like right from the beginning, like she's seducing others. There's this criminal, and she kind of turns him to her side, and already he's walking around killing people for her, and he almost doesn't even know why he's doing it. He tries to fight against her, and she's like, "Nope, this isn't going to happen. Let's go. Let's do this." So I mean, again, weaponizing sexuality right from the beginning. We have Daredevil save a man from almost killing himself. He's trying to help Tyrone very roughly, but again, he was taught by the roughest person possible, Stick. So there's a reason for him acting like that. We have Kingpin in the most ridiculous-looking leisure wear, playing a tennis or a squash. I don't know what he's supposed to be playing, but it's great. And again, this is really all about kind of setting up where we're going to go from here. We got Matt worrying about Tyrone. You have Kingpin hearing about this Typhoid Mary who's cutting up all these criminals. And so he's like, well, maybe I can turn her to my side. So he gets a dossier on her, which is incredibly ludicrously detailed, but okay.
Yeah.
And he's, going to try and hire this woman to work for him to, do exactly what he said in the last issue, strike at Murdock's heart, use her, multiple personalities to make him fall in love with her, and then, really put the gut punch on him. And that's basically the issue.
I really like the beginning with the suicide jumper. It's just kind of one of those things. It's like at the beginning of a movie, you have a little tease or like a dramatic situation where Daredevil or the hero has to step in order for you to learn about the hero's power set, in order to learn about the hero's moral values and that kind of thing. And this is what this is. This also is a guy who has lost or hasn't achieved the American dream, so he's killing himself. Like, it's a perfect example of Nocenti's views here.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, throughout this issue, we talk about that the garbage, the smell of garbage is everywhere because there's a garbage strike, and the entire city is starting to smell like garbage, and everyone feels like garbage. Like, you get this claustrophobic feeling throughout the issue that not only when like Typhoid Mary is on the scene, everything's hotter, but you also have this stench of garbage, this sense of everything being dirty.
Now, the garbage strike was something that happened in all of the books, right? In all of the Marvel Universe books?
I can't remember.
I can't remember either, but I seem to recall right before Inferno other instances of this garbage strike. Maybe it was in New Mutants or maybe it was in Spider-Man. I don't remember. But yeah, that was very familiar for me when I was reading these here. And I tried to Google to see if there was an actual real garbage strike in New York around this time, but I couldn't find anything.
No way.
Yeah. I really like how all of the word balloons for Typhoid are in pink. That really gives a very striking and visual difference to her character. And it plays up. They're not consistent with this because her word balloons are not pink in every issue. But in some of the issues where we're dealing with Mary and Typhoid talking to each other, Typhoid's speech bubbles are in pink and Mary's are in white. So you can see that there are two different voices talking. And I like that duality.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. Actually, I just quickly looked up. So in 1981, there was a big New York trash strike. It was 17 days. And previous to that, the Great Garbage Strike of 1968. So, I mean, the most recent one would have been 81. So.
But even that's a little far away from, like, it wouldn't have been current events at the time. People would have for sure remembered it. Like, I remember a big garbage strike that happened here in Vancouver several years ago, but I don't know if that would have been inspiration to put that into comic book form. I'm not sure.
You never know.
Yeah, I don't know. Yep. So on page 32, where Mary is talking to this guy that she has seduced, he says, "Back off! You treat me like you're the man and I'm some girl." And that is the role reversal that Nocenti is trying to put on display here. Like, the Typhoid is definitely taking on the dominance and the characteristics typically associated with male power and putting it in a female form.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and you mentioned the Kingpin looking at the Typhoid Mary's, like, I guess it's a video or something he's watching of her origin story. Very, very detailed. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was surprised that they explained everything kind of right off the bat, because there's a lot of mystery to this character, and I would have thought that they would have let that play out a little bit more, especially with the split personality part of it.
I feel like maybe, I wonder how much, like, I'd be curious how much of her came fully formed and how much of it, maybe talk to editors about, like, how much they should portray right away. Like, this is a really interesting character. We're gonna have a storyline for her. She's not just going to be a done in one. I'm curious, what the conversation might have been with, Ralph Macchio and others to kind of say, like, how much should we really be divulging about this character right away? And do we need to kind of front load it so that people understand the facets? Because if you only slowly kind of peel the onion in terms of what we're getting here, is there a way to do that naturally in the story? Is there a way that wouldn't be unnatural or ruin the flow? Like, this is kind of a nice way of quickly giving you everything you need to know about this brand new character and why she's going to do the things that she does. And then you just kind of get to go with it.
I guess there's so. Yep.
You know what I mean? You just hit the
Yep.
ground running. Yeah, it's a two-page info dump, which, to be honest, these days actually seems relatively brief. And then you go right into, this is who the character is, and you can really, do everything you need because all of that setup was already done. So
Yep.
I think there's, I agree with you. They really could have portrayed the mystery longer, but I think it was almost more interesting to have the reader know everything so that you can see just how badly Matt Murdock is going to screw up.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, you make a good point there. I think I agree with that here, and I think also Kingpin wouldn't go into a relationship with somebody like this without fully knowing all about that person. He doesn't like to be surprised.
For sure, and he's obviously been screwed with some of his assassins in the past, so it makes sense he's going to do a lot of homework. It's interesting too how later he ends up in a relationship with Mary as well. I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves, but it's fascinating to see, and this is going to be something that lasts. I mean, I don't know. Like, obviously, the next Daredevil epic that come out is The Last Rites, I believe, right?
Yeah,
that's the next one.
Yep.
So have you read any of those stories before?
I have not.
Okay. Because it's in Chichester puts a really neat bow on everything that happens with Mary, and in that storyline, and it's really well done. So it's nice to kind of reacquaint myself with the early days of Mary, and as we go through these volumes, kind of the middle days, before we eventually get to kind of the ending of her being a recurring character, at least for a while, when Chichester kind of pushes her off the board, not in a mean way, and I don't think I think he was just wrapping up a loose end.
That's cool. I can't wait to get to that. That sounds really interesting.
It's definitely is Matt having to confront himself and do something that's a little icky for the better good. And again, that's something that Daredevil always does.
Right. Okay, moving on to issue number 255. This one's called Temptation. And this issue I found quite interesting, even though it's basically all talking heads. This is the issue of the trial, the Kelco Trial. Foggy Nelson is representing Kelco, who is accused of toxic waste dumping, which led to the blindness of this little boy who was playing in a place and came across this radioactive sludge that blinded him. And it's not Matt. What's the guy's name here? The lawyer that's representing Tyrone and his family.
Oh God, I can't remember his name.
I forgot to write it down, so I can't remember. But anyway, he comes from the free aid clinic that Matt set up. And Matt is using this guy as basically his mouthpiece. He wants to represent Tyrone because he really feels attached to Tyrone because of the similarities of their blindness. But he's lost his status as a lawyer. He's not allowed to practice law right now. So he's a shadow lawyer. He's speaking through this guy, coaching him, telling him what to say. And what I find really interesting is Foggy picks up on that instantly. He's like, that's exactly what Matt would say. This is definitely Matt. And this is kind of Foggy's big re-entry into being a lawyer as well, right? So this is kind of his first big case, and now he didn't expect to go up against his best friend all of a sudden, like right away. So I thought that was a really cool play. We don't get to see a whole lot of Foggy in this volume, so it's nice to get those moments with him to see where he's at.
For sure. And the lawyer who does end up representing Tyrone, his name is David.
David, right? Yeah, that's right.
This issue is obviously, as you said, it's a lot of talking heads, but we get a lot of important stuff because we get Matt and Mary's first kind of crossing the line.
Yep.
And such an uncomfortable way to do it with poor Tyrone in the room, and you have Matt just kind of giving in to these desires that he can't really understand what is happening or why he's doing this.
Yeah.
And he's just kind of, and it's interesting to me that we don't, like when all this is happening, we don't really have any internal monologue or any thought process whenever Matt does any of these things. So whenever he's being kind of manipulated and he's really close to Mary, we don't even get to see inside his mind, which I think is an interesting perspective. Like we see him talking usually before he meets Mary or after he meets Mary, but typically when he's with Mary, we're not actually seeing his thought process on how tormented he is. So it makes it an extra level of uncomfortable.
I think that there might not be any thoughts in his head at the time. And this brings me to a question of what exactly are Mary's powers? Now, we know that she has the split personality, and they make a big deal of saying that even when she is Mary or when she's Typhoid, she even has a completely different scent. Her heartbeat has a different rhythm. Like she is literally a different person. or kind of not really literally a different person, but it's like so that Daredevil can't tell them apart. I mean, so the Daredevil thinks that they are different people, right?
Yeah.
But she also has this telekinesis. She can move objects with her mind. That seems kind of out of left field. But then there's also this aspect of like, does she have some mental powers? Can she control people's thoughts? At first, when she influenced the guy that she uses as her stooge in the first issue, she scratches him on the cheek, and I thought maybe there is some sort of poison that she puts in that takes over his mind or something like that. But that doesn't happen with Matt, nor does it happen with Kingpin or Kingpin's bodyguard later on in this volume. How exactly does she control people? And if she does control people, that would explain maybe why we don't have any thought balloons from Matt during this section, because he actually doesn't have thoughts of his own while he's under her influence.
Yeah, so she has like a psionic hypnosis, and she can like kind of implant mental suggestions into others.
Yeah.
Eventually, and this is later, much later, there's going to be a third Mary personality.
Okay.
That was used in, I think, Spectacular Spider-Man at some point. That was Bloody Mary. So that there ended up being kind of Mary, Typhoid Mary, and Bloody Mary. So Typhoid ended up kind of being the middle one in terms of how powerful she was. Yeah. And I don't know if you remember this, but eventually Typhoid ends up becoming part of the Avengers Initiative project. For a while, she was a very mysterious character known as Mutant Zero. And at the time, people thought it might have been Jean Grey because of her hair, but she ended up being Typhoid Mary.
Huh. No, I didn't read any of that stuff. That's cool.
Well, I just ruined it if you ever go back and you're like, oh, who's this mysterious character? Well, that jerk Adam already told me.
Well, maybe I'll forget it by that point. Anything else you want to say about this issue? Oh, I know what I wanted to say. The Kingpin tries to buy off a lot of the jury. Like he says,
that hasn't been done yet.
I guess he's making plans to do that. He has said though that he has orchestrated all of the evidence and everything so that Matt will fail, because he knows that Matt's on one side.
Absolutely.
And since he owns Kelco, he is, invested in winning. So he has orchestrated a whole bunch of stuff. I guess it's not the jury that he's paid off, but it's it's the lawyers and the defendants or whatever. Everybody presenting, he's paid off. At the
end of this issue, he does say like, buy one of them tonight, like buy one of the jurors tonight, so that it's unanimous. So we're setting up something that's about to happen, but he's definitely going to make this go his way no matter what. Which leads us into issue 256, which has one of the weirdest first pages, just because you have Daredevil kind of standing in front of you in this kind of weird pose.
Yeah.
And, it's funny. It's just, again, a weird kind of, it does show that Daredevil, especially at this time, is very much a street level guy that everyone's used to seeing around the neighborhood, and like not just up jumping across buildings, but actually at street level, the fact that people don't even really look at him when he's standing there,
right?
Talking to a guy who's doing 3-card Monte, like he's just part of the firmament. They're just used to him being around.
That is true. All throughout these issues, people are constantly saying, "Hey, look, there's Daredevil. Daredevil's one of the good guys. Hi, Daredevil!" Like they're talking to him, like they're buddies, and everybody knows him. That is interesting. I think I like this opening because Daredevil has been letting Mary or letting Typhoid get away with taking down these gambling rings and everything. Like she's actually doing good work in a bad way, and he's struggling with his place in the whole system. He doesn't know exactly where he stands, and he's second-guessing himself. And so I think as a way of compensation, he takes out this 3-card Monte guy, which is like no threat. He's hustling people for a little bit of cash, but it's like not a huge deal. And Daredevil's like busting him on it. He's like, Daredevil, you've got bigger things to worry about here. But he's like, he's trying to convince himself, I think, that he's doing the right thing in a lot of circumstances where he's really not focusing his attention in the right place.
For sure. And then in this issue, we have, one of the first big moments where Mary and Typhoid are at odds, and we have Mary getting home, and she starts, wiping the makeup off, and then she, is fluffing her hair, and she realizes that something's wrong. She's realizing that she looks different, that she looks like that woman. She's trying to like talk to herself. herself, trying to like write notes to herself, and then the Typhoid Mary personality takes over. So this is the first time where we really get to see that dichotomy and how they are really at odds and fighting with each other.
It's interesting reading this because I've been reading Moon Knight at the same time, like the classic Moon Knight, and Moon Knight has, his three or four personalities as well. But it's such a different way of portraying it, because these ones, they don't know that each other exists, but for Moon Knight, they do know each other exists, and he can easily switch between the four of them, and it's not a huge deal. But with Mary, yeah, it's like there's a power struggle between the two forces to see who's in control.
For sure. And then we have Matt Murdock visiting Foggy Nelson, which it's weird that a lot of the stuff that you and I have read for the Daredevil epics, we barely had Foggy in the book.
Yeah, really.
That Foggy Nelson is this incredibly important supporting character with Daredevil, and yet most of the stuff we've read, he's barely been around or has just not been the Foggy Nelson you'd expect, and that's what we get here as well. Like, he's with Gloriana, who is a character we've already seen die in a future volume, which is weird too.
Yes, that's right.
And then Murdock shows up and he browbeats Foggy for not checking who is basically paying his checks. Gloriana, I really like that Nocenti let Gloriana have more agency here and really take him to task for being a bit of a dick, which I appreciated. I mean, again, she feels very different in a good way than she did under Frank Miller's pen when she was just kind of politely shoved into Foggy Nelson's arms in Born Again, whereas this feels much more organic and it feels like she's a real person who is strong, which again makes it sadder that they eventually killed her off in the way that they did. We have Typhoid Mary finally delivering the bribe to the juror and basically saying this is all sewn up, no issues. And then we have a protracted sequence of Typhoid Mary and Daredevil fighting each other in the sewers. And he's just not really able to take her out. And then near the end of that fight, she kind of reverts back to Mary and runs away. And Daredevil's kind of confused as to what's going on. He visits the juror. He's able to convince her, not to. We don't even know at this point if he convinced her or not to not take the bribe. We have this juxtaposition of him and Typhoid getting home and what they're doing, and Matt kind of being again very dickish to Karen. Like, she's not given a lot of room here in these issues, but they're getting farther and farther away from each other as he's getting more and more under Typhoid Mary's spell. And then when the issue ends, the juror ended up not taking the bribe, as well as Foggy Nelson is now quitting, and Kingpin's having a bad day.
Yeah. I love seeing Kingpin in these issues. It's like the way they portray him here is what is he doing? Oh no, he's just in court in this issue, isn't he? But he's either practicing his archery, or he's playing squash, or it's lifting weights.
Oh yeah,
doing stuff that he doesn't usually do. He's way more recreational in this than sitting behind his desk. I really like the end here, where we have kind of the parallel storytelling after they have their big battle in the sewer. They both climb into their apartment window and take a shower, and they're thinking about the same thing. And it's Mary who's talking, but and Mary and Matt have the same fear of typhoid. So they are. It's like you can understand why they are, why they're together, why they're a couple, because they have sort of a shared traumatic experience with typhoid that Matt can't share with Karen, although they don't know that each other have that thing. It's kind of a weird setup. I really like it. I think this whole this whole affair, if you want to call it an affair, that Matt is having is quite it's creepy, it's a little gross, but it's compelling at the same time. It's like, I want to know why he's doing what he's doing and how he's going to eventually mess it all up, and what Karen's reaction is going to be.
Yeah.
It's good drama, good soap opera.
Absolutely.
If you're following along in the epic, right after this issue, there's a pinup in Marvel Fanfare, from Marvel Fanfare number 43 by Brian Murray, and I really like this pinup. I just like the off-center horizon and the Daredevil in the shadows, just taking a leap off this ledge. I think it's really nice, just the mood of the city and such.
Absolutely.
Just before we get to Daredevil 257, we're going to tackle Punisher number 10, because this is a two-part crossover between Punisher and Daredevil, and so I've invited my Punisher host, Chris Marshall, to join us. Hi, Chris.
Hey, guys. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So let's start with this Punisher issue. Chris, can you, since you're the Punisher host, can you give us a recap?
Yeah, so pretty much we're in New York City, and there is a bunch of overdoses going on with pills. People are popping these pills, and there is an overdose, and Frank is kind of getting in on this and kind of pinpointing where exactly this is happening. And he kind of breaks it down into he's going after a drug lord that it's kind of interesting. This dude working out in his apartment. This dude is, I don't know, Kurtis. He's a pretty strong dude hanging out in his underwear lifting weights, and he's really bothering the woman who lives next door.
Well, yeah, because he's dropping like 200-pound weights just on the floor of his apartment. I don't think that's safe.
Yeah, this is not safe for kids. You know, when you turn the page, and even when he's doing crunches, it looks like he's got no underwear on, which is pretty scary. But it looks like, you know, this guy is the culprit, drugging everybody, and even Daredevil is getting wind of this, saying he's on TV, and Frank sees him on TV. You know, the reporters are asking Daredevil, you know, what do you think about this? And he's like, you know, if you're doing this, you know, I'm addressing anyone who has been placing cyanide-laced medicines in Queens. Please stop doing this and turn yourself in. It's like, yeah, whatever, dude. And I don't think that Daredevil would be on TV anyway. I hope Adam can address that. You know, that you know, he's a man of the people, I guess.
Yeah, that's weird.
It's kind of odd, you know. And what's even odder is that Frank, you know, he's kind of pinpoint this location. He goes to the Jehovah Witnesses to see if he can, you know, if somebody in the neighborhood can point him towards, you know, what's going on with the drug problems here. So
I thought that actually was a great idea, because Jehovah Witnesses, they know everybody. They go door to door and talk to every single person. However, what is ridiculous about this is that they would actually, you know the person who is behind this. Like, oh, that guy, he's just a weirdo. I think you should check him out. That's basically what they say.
Yeah.
And it happens to be the guy. So good idea, not a great resolution. However, Frank should consult the JWs all the time because they know everybody.
Yeah, so Frank kind of gets wind from the Jehovah's Witness guy that you know, he should go take a look at the where this strong guy is living, and he poses as a plumber. And this is kind of funny. He poses as a plumber, but then the woman actually hires him to do plumbing work because her sink is actually busted up. So I thought that was kind of a comedic moment there, that he actually has work to do. And
he actually solves the problem too. He actually does it.
He does. So he's very resourceful.
Yep.
You know, yeah. A handyman in more ways than one.
And then he pulls his large gun out of his toolbox.
Yeah. But not before he stops the woman from you know, doing her mouthwash, which, you know, who does mouthwash in the middle of the day when a strange man is in your apartment? So I don't know what's on her mind there, but that was another comedic moment. But then he goes after this dude. A really good fight ensues, actually. And he ends up, you know, I love the scene on 364 of the Punisher Epic volume, that, you know, way he jumps out the window. I thought the art there is just really, really cool. You actually hear him come out of the window. Yeah,
the choreography is just great in all of this, and the following Daredevil fight too.
Yeah, so I was just going to mention that. So Frank catches up with him, and he's just ready to throw this guy over the roof where Daredevil shows up, and he throws his stick right at Frank, dropping the guy down to the ground, and they have a little talk. You know, even Daredevil says, I think we should have had this discussion years ago. We know what that is in reference to, those issues. And sure enough, they have a really nice fight on the rooftop. Seems like Frank and Matt are always fighting on rooftops. And but what's classic also is the guy gets up and he's got a gun, and Daredevil just takes care of him with one swing, it seems, and just knocks him down. And Daredevil takes him away, and Frank goes back to the house, gets his toolbox, and he basically saves her life, the woman's life, and he's got a black eye for it, and it says, see Daredevil at $257 on sale now for another side of the story, which I think was a really ingenious way to do things.
Yeah.
Having looking at two sides of the coin kind of thing, which is really, really great to see. So there's actually a third part to this, which I will tease and get to you after Adam does his recap of Daredevil 257.
Okay. Adam, do you want to take first thoughts? You want to give your first thoughts of this issue?
Well, what I really like about it is that it casts Punisher in a different light, that we actually see him more as a detective than just a blunt instrument, which we often see more of.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice to see him actually kind of figuring things out, try to, track down this guy, posing as a federal agent. Like, he's doing more than just what we typically see Punisher do, which is just kind of go after the bad guys. This is him actually doing detective work to actually make it happen.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like how he weeds out the fact that when he finds out that it's probably a disgruntled employee, it's like he leads out all these people for different reasons. He even eliminates women because it's probably not going to be a woman. All of that kind of stuff to find out that it's this guy. So yeah, I think I like that. I think it's really neat.
As for like Daredevil, again, it's interesting. It's weird that he's on TV, but otherwise he just kind of shows up, and I feel like the Daredevil issue maybe does which we'll get into in a minute, maybe does a better job kind of showing that there's going to be, these two characters are going to be intertwined in some way. Whereas here it just kind of feels like Daredevil just kind of shows up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The other issue is definitely better laid out in terms of showing what Frank is doing kind of at the same time as what Daredevil's doing.
But it is interesting because each one, there's obviously it's not just the other side of the story. I feel like you kind of need both to really get the full sense of everything that's going on, because there's certain Daredevil things which don't come across the same in his own book. And the same thing with Punisher. There's some Punisher stuff which doesn't come across the same way in his own. When you have the different books, they actually go a little bit further into the other character than I would have expected.
Yeah.
And like even the fight sequence between. Well, and again, I guess we'll get to it, but the fight sequence between Daredevil and Punisher reads very differently in Punisher because you get a lot of the talking and a lot of the moralizing, which you would expect Daredevil to do to Frank. And yet when you have in the actual Daredevil comic, you get a lot less of that.
I would just say, do you think, Adam, that Ann Nocenti and Mike Baron talked about that in their meetings?
That's a really good question. I would imagine they would have had to. It just feels weird because I feel like Nocenti often is heavy on dialogue and heavy on moralizing and heavy on like the parts of Daredevil that Daredevil is very holier than that with Punisher. And I would have thought of either writer, I thought she would have gone harder on kind of eulogizing or like, doing a lot of soliloquies or a lot of talking at Frank. I would have expected that more from her than Baron.
Huh, interesting.
Well, I have an answer to your question because I actually did ask Mike Baron if they talked about this issue. And he said that no, he just wrote this one issue, left in the cliffhanger, and then handed it over to her to finish it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was just, it was very interesting. So the fact that Ann Nocenti decided to make the Daredevil issue sort of the opposite side of things was her idea because Mike Baron just set this up.
Interesting.
Well, why don't we move over to Daredevil number 257. Adam, can you walk us through this one?
We have the other side. So, although it's interesting because we have, Punisher kind of doing the same type of thing we saw in the other one, the idea that he wants to find this aspirin killer. Then we do spend more time with Daredevil and kind of understanding there's a lot more of what's going on in Daredevil's world at this point compared to, I haven't read the other Punisher comics at the time, but I feel like his was much more kind of, it could have been read almost in any context in any, sequence of issues, whereas the Daredevil is very of the time. You have Typhoid Mary, or Mary, I should say, and Kingpin, and he has his own kind of weird feelings about Mary, and he's using Mary obviously to get at Daredevil, but at the same time he wants Mary for himself. It's really weird and twisted. We have Daredevil in plain clothes just doing an investigation at a factory, which is ludicrous. So we have Daredevil doing an investigation, which doesn't really make a lot of sense that they would allow him in, but he's trying to investigate and find out, who the guy is who's been lacing these drugs or who might have been laid off. And then we see a lot more of understanding, I guess, the perspective of the guy who was, lacing everything with the drugs. In fact, that he was, a laid off worker. He's really kind of irritated and upset. So it definitely humanizes him a bit more, although he's still a monster. Don't worry, we're not humanizing him too much. Again, a lot more with Typhoid Mary, dealing with her. And then we pick up with Punisher about to kill the guy, which it's weird to read not having read the Punisher book, because you know that this guy is there, you know that this drug pusher's there, and the next time you see him, Punisher already has him over his head. Like, it's just like, what happened?
Yeah, but that's because we are getting things from Daredevil's perspective.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then we have Daredevil versus Punisher, and again, it's interesting because there's a lot of narration here from the dealer. He's commenting on what's happening and his perspective as these two guys are going at it. But you don't actually hear any words that Daredevil and Punisher are actually saying to each other, which is interesting. And I guess maybe part of it was that she didn't have to worry about replicating the exact dialogue beats. Instead, she was able to vaguely have it from the point of view of this guy who's watching them just beat each other up. And it goes on a lot longer than in the Punisher book, too.
It does.
In the Punisher book, it's relatively brief, but here, it's extremely drawn out and really thrilling. Like, John Romita Jr. really knows how to show these guys absolutely laying into each other.
I was going to make the note that there are several pages in both of these books where the dialogue is so sparse. And they just let... actually, Nocenti really likes to write dialogue during the fight scene, so that's not quite an accurate comment. But Mike Baron, in the Punisher issue, the whole fight scene's almost wordless. It's not very much going on there at all.
Mm-hmm.
And what I liked about it is because you have it from the perspective of the drug dealer, is that, he's about to, shoot them, and he just gets a billy club to the head and he doesn't remember anything after that, which is a really nice way of not having to kind of show the ending of that whole sequence.
Right.
Like, it's interesting. Like, I really am curious what people would have felt if they hadn't read the other issue, if they just got this, if they would have even noticed that they missed anything, or just been like, well, that's the story they told.
Yeah. That is interesting.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, if you were to read this, you wouldn't know what happens with Punisher.
Yeah, how do they leave things?
How do they leave it? That's the thing. So
especially after how knockdown, drag out the fight was.
Yeah, you're right.
I guess you have to buy the other issue.
Yeah, and then with the rest of the issue, we have more with Kingpin and Typhoid Mary. Also with Matt and Mary, because he's doing, he's cheating on his girl at this point. He's doing a lot of bad things he should be doing. And then one thing I felt about the way in which the drug dealer was illustrated, he reminded me visually a little bit of the Bullet character that was used in Daredevil during this period. So at first I had to kind of do a double check to make sure it wasn't that guy and it was just this other dude.
I feel like he's a stereotype of the 80s right there, with his mustache
Very
and his
much
long
so.
hair. Yeah.
And what I like about this is that by tying in the idea of this drug and this corporation, I mean, this is kind of what Matt Murdock was doing at the time. He was helping people. He was, helping. He wasn't a lawyer. He wasn't. He had been disbarred, but he was providing kind of legal assistance with people, and that's kind of where he was here, trying to help people. And he does want to help others, and this is definitely kind of drives that forth here.
Well, I can just say that if you want a third perspective of this, which is kind of cool, in the 2012 series of Punisher, number 7, there is a couple of cops that witness the fight, and they give like their quick synopsis of what's going on when they see Daredevil and Frank fight. It's kind of like a flashback. So I think it was Greg Rucka's run. That's right. That
yeah.
Was in. So that was pretty cool. So some things do get used over and over and over again. So.
Mm-hmm. So in the back of the Punisher Epic Collection, there is an afterword from Ralph Macchio, and he talks a little bit about this Alfred Coppersmith character in the Punisher Daredevil crossover. He says, Mike Baron, who scripted the issue of Punisher, and Ann Nocenti, who wrote the following Daredevil issue, are both from very different places on the political spectrum. I happen to have been the editor on that Daredevil issue, and I was truly amazed at how professional both writers were. Please go back and reread each of those outstanding stories, and I defy you to decide which writer is more attuned to the conservative or liberal point of view. So I thought that was interesting too, because, would you say that Daredevil is a liberal character and Punisher is a conservative character?
I mean, generally, I would say yes.
I would say yes. Yeah.
And so we have Mike Baron who is a very conservative guy, writing The Punisher and doing a good job, and I would say not pushing his own political agenda with the Daredevil dialogue. And then Nocenti does the same thing with The Punisher, and definitely writes in Punisher's voice, even though she doesn't agree with those political points of view, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a big part of that, to be honest, I mean, not to take anything away from the high degree of skill that both writers have, but you do have, I mean, Punisher and Daredevil have very clear, like their moral systems, generally speaking, are like granite. Like you kind of know what they are.
Yeah.
Like they're not characters who are very mutable. Like they have a very specific perspective. So I feel like they're very. Yeah, they're very absolute. So in terms of a writing perspective, you don't have to get into a sense of grays with these characters. You just kind of have to understand that absolutism. And I think that might be actually easier to write than writing someone who's a little bit more shades of gray.
You also have it's obvious that Daredevil is acting as the antagonist in the Punisher issue, and Punisher is acting as the antagonist in the Daredevil issue, even though it's the exact same scene.
Mm-hmm.
One thing we didn't even mention some of the stuff, but with the Petraccio art, I do like that Punisher just lies in his bed at night, fully garbed in his Punisher gear with his gun.
Yeah, right.
Like he is not messing around. He's like, I am the Punisher. This is who I am. This is how I sleep.
24/7.
He is. He's always on.
Oh yeah. Okay. One last note. The Punisher episode, the Punisher issue is titled "The Creep," and the Daredevil issue is titled "The Bully." And throughout both of these issues, they kind of like they play with these titles, like who is actually the creep. Punisher calls the bodybuilder the creep, and the lady in the hall calls the Punisher the creep. And Daredevil thinks the Punisher's being the bully, but then the bully is also the corporation is the bully to the bodybuilder, and like there's so much wordplay going on between the titles of these two issues.
Oh, for sure. Well, and even you have the idea of Mary and Typhoid Mary. She says, I won't let you bully me. So there's an extra layer too, right? Like everyone in here is somehow dealing with that.
Yeah, I was surprised that that this was such an important issue for Typhoid Mary in this team up. Usually they save the big stuff for when they're not doing the crossovers and stuff. But this is the issue where I think Mary really kind of interacts with her other self on a more obvious level. True.
And another thing that does strike me is that, considering the time frame, I mean, this is a pretty mature two comics. I mean, you're dealing with, people being poisoned, and even like the first page of the Punisher book where you have the woman gets this Zumatrin for pain relief, gets home, and then pops some, and then just kind of starts to die. Like that's pretty. And then their kid comes in, right? Like it's pretty crazy. Like it's a very visceral. It is meant to evoke a reaction, but just considering the time, I'm surprised.
Yeah, totally.
And like even with the creep in the Punisher series, just the typeface with the blood kind of dripping down, that's pretty intense for the time period as well.
Yeah, and that's all over the Punisher books. I know you haven't been in our conversation for the Punisher, but that's definitely something that you see in every Punisher issue.
Interesting. The one thing that it's interesting, so these issues are obviously dealing with, pretty serious subject matter, and they take themselves seriously. But the first, I guess the second page of the Daredevil issue, so you have, the shot of Frank, with the gun looking a little static. It's actually not the most vibrant shot of the Punisher as he's just emptying his clip. But the sound effects really are kind of almost too funny in the way that they're kind of larger than life, like the pacow, the butter, like it almost seems too loud. And then you have the bully in like yellow, and it just seems very, I don't know, Saturday afternoon, but it's not.
I swear, and I can't place my finger on it, but I swear that splash page is a mock-up or a parody of an old like 1930s gangster movie poster.
Okay, that would make sense.
Yeah.
I can't place my finger on it, but it's so familiar. So if any of you out there are listening and can tell me what that is, if I'm right, please write in and let me know.
I do hope that someone is able to find that.
Thanks, Chris, for joining us for these 2 issues, and we'll catch you on another Punisher episode.
Thanks. It was great to be here.
Adam, do you want to take us through issue number 258?
Okay, so 258 is it's an inventory story. So here we kind of we take a break from the regular story by Nocenti to tell a very different story. It's so interesting to me because not only is it very different because you have a different writer. You have Fabian Nicias is writing it. You also have as different an artist as you can imagine from the John Romita Jr. of this time, which is Ron Lim, and it feels like a very different Ron Lim than I'm ever used to seeing.
So different.
I'm used to Ron Lim's characters, like obviously usually on Silver Surfer, etc., looking a certain way, and this just felt so different.
And I wonder if that's the influence of Jim Sanders as the inker, doing his putting a lot of his own into the pencils. This is also how long is this? Is 1988? Is Ron Lim fairly new still to comics at the time?
That's the thing. I was wondering that too. I didn't actually have a chance to double check that, but I actually really like it. Like that first page, there's so much expressiveness and so much detail.
Yep.
But it's still animated. It's not too realistic. It's really well done. I had a brief as I was reading it today. I was like, I don't think Fabian Nicieza has ever talked about this. So I tweeted at him a few things, just being like, what inspired this story? And he said that, his very, very Fabian, he said his brain inspired him to come up with something that he thought sounded interesting. So I'm like, all right, cool. So I asked him, which is it's a very Fabian thing to say. Which I mean, if you ever listen to him in interviews, that's just his style. So I said, I enjoyed the recurring use of the title throughout. It's called "I Heard the Jungle Breathe," and how you used Bengal, who's the villain that's used here. I said, what was it like coming in to do a fill-in Daredevil in the midst of Van's run? Any issues from the Comics Code Authority on the portrayal of Vietnam and the violence presented and at times alluded to? He said it was totally cool to get a chance to do that inventory issue, especially since Ron was going to draw it. So it does make me wonder where Ron kind of was in his career at this point. And he says, I got to use a character and the storyline I'd created while in high school in a real comic. And he also said the Comics Code Authority had absolutely no issues with the subject matter at all.
Nice.
Because I was curious about that, because it's such an, I mean, it is the textbook definition of an inventory story. It could be slotted in almost anywhere. It's a very neat and tidy done in one Daredevil issue. It doesn't really even involve Matt Murdock really operating as Matt Murdock. It's just a Daredevil issue, so it doesn't matter what Matt Murdock's really going through in his life or what his status quo is. It's as long as he's Daredevil, it kind of still works. It obviously needed to take place in this period where Vietnam was still relatively recent,
right?
And it's all about this. This child who, was, almost killed in Vietnam, and he's, coming to avenge the death of all these people that he grew up with by targeting the people who were on the chopper that, took off and basically try to hunt them all down. Very simple, but extremely well done. And, the character doesn't really speak. So it gives an added sense of tension. It's very tense because you don't know what the character's thinking or saying. You just know that they're kind of this unrelenting force coming to, exact vengeance.
Now, I'm not surprised that the Comic Code Authority didn't have any issues because Marvel was publishing a lot of war stuff at this time. I mean, we had Punisher War Journal, we had the Nam, we had Semper Fi. There were a bunch of different war titles. And this follows right in line with that. It's not too graphic. It shows you just enough that you need to know in order to get the gravity of the situation. And because it's an inventory story, I don't think that your question was what was it like trying to slot it into the middle of Nocenti's run here? Based on the artwork, I wonder if this story was actually written maybe a couple of years earlier. And that's why Ron Lim's art looks the way it does, is because it was done years ago, and he was still new and didn't have his style in place yet. And it's just been sitting in a warehouse filing cabinet waiting to be used. And now, JR has a double issue coming up. They need an extra month in order for him to get ahead, so they pull that out of the filing cabinet and run it.
Yeah, I mean, that's possible. The only other thing I can think of is that, Nicieza didn't join staff until, 85? So, I mean, yeah, it could have been in there for a little while, but his first published story was until 87, and I don't think he'd written anything at that point.
Right. I mean, he wasn't on the writing staff, but he was still employed by Marvel. because he was working
absolutely.
marketing, right? So I wonder if maybe just as freelance he wrote something and sold it to Marvel, and they stuck it away in an inventory, the inventory drawer. I'm not sure. Yeah, that'd be interesting to talk more to Nicieza about this specifically.
Yeah, because it looks like, I mean, Ron Lim, I'm taking this from Wikipedia, so obviously it could be very wrong, but it looks like he wasn't really discovered by Marvel until a 1987 comic convention. Again, he started penciling Silver Surfer in '88, so this is right around that period.
That's true, and his penciling in Silver Surfer was very much his own style. Like he already had that kind of going. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it is just the influence of Jim Sanders as the inker that makes.
Could be many things, right? It's always interesting to me to look at stuff where it's, again, such an early period, and both careers of both the creators is such an early story for both of them. It's interesting to see how their early work looks, both in terms of the writing and in the art.
Okay,
it's a good story, though. I liked it.
Yeah, I like it too. I felt maybe a little heavy-handed in some of the political context of.
Hold on. You thought that Nicieza was heavy-handed in a political context in the middle of an Nocenti book?
No, well, yes. I think he was. Nicieza was trying to say so much in one issue, whereas Nocenti can spread out her political leanings throughout the entire thing. But he, we have in the first 2 pages of this whole book, talking about the American soldiers going in and just decimating a Vietnamese village, like killing everybody, blowing everything up. That's just in the first 2 pages, and he's definitely got some things to say about that. And then talking, more about the PTSD from the soldiers and how that affects people, and the way that this kid has grown up, being the only survivor and devoted his life to hunting these guys down. And there's a lot packed into one issue. And they even have time for a couple of good spars between Bengal, this character Bengal, and Daredevil.
It's interesting that they call him Bengal, but he's only ever referred to it once. And Daredevil says something at the very end about, they'll take care of Bengal. And I'm like, how do you know his name?
Right, yeah.
He never said it.
That's
and
true.
You just came up with it. I mean, unless Daredevil knew the cover of his own comic, that's the only way he's going to know.
On the last page of this issue, on page 167 in this epic, the look of shock on Bengal's face, that's a Ron Lim face right there. That's probably the most Ron Lim I can... I mean, you can see it in a lot of his poses still, and sometimes in the faces you can see a classic Ron Lim style face, but that one really strikes me as being Ron Lim, and maybe it's just because it looks like Norenrad.
Yeah.
But my question here at the end here is, why does Daredevil take Bengal to Willie's apartment and say, "Look at his face, look and remember"? Why does he say that? And obviously, it has the effect that Daredevil wants, because he sees the guy, and I mean, I think you're supposed to infer that he remembers that this guy is a blind guy on the helicopter and couldn't have possibly been one of the guys that was forcing him out of the helicopter as a kid. But how would Daredevil make that connection? I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, I guess is it in the text that he tells them a lot about what happened in Vietnam and on that thing. So maybe he's just hoping that the kid will remember, his face, and that he'll know.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
It's a big leap, but I mean, it's comics. It's not that big a leap.
Yeah, I guess so. It just didn't seem like as satisfying of an ending as I would have hoped, especially with the tragedy from this guy, this character. Bengal gets no closure. He's out for revenge, and I guess we assume that he just goes off and kills the other people that he's going to kill. He just spared Willie because he realized Willie was innocent in it, but he goes off and continues his quest, or what?
Well, I don't know, because Daredevil and this guy obviously think he's dead.
No body, no death.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, that the idea that, usually when there's no body, they're still alive, but the fact that the characters so obviously think that he's dead, and Daredevil's like, don't worry about it. Let's call the police. Let's have them pick up Bengal's body. But the art doesn't support what he's saying. So it is a weird ending.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I don't think we ever see him again, so it probably doesn't matter.
Too bad. It's kind of interesting to know that this was a character that Nicieza created in high school that he just brought into it now. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I would known that. That's one of those. It's interesting the things you can do on Twitter, right? And just talk to people and
Yeah.
find out little tidbits that you never would have known if you hadn't asked.
It's great. Okay, so now we're going to move on to page number 259, The Children Are Watching You. And this issue leads directly into our kind of big conclusion issue. And I'm glad they put the inventory issue where they did, because it was kind of a natural breaking point. If this really was put there because of the fact that Romita needed an extra month to do this double-sized 260, then they could have put it after this issue, but by putting it before, it makes these next two issues flow really, really well. So that's nice. In this issue, The Children Are Watching You. Butch, one of these other kids, he's the kid who has a star on his helmet. He witnesses a kidnapping, a girl being sold. We're dealing with human trafficking now, child trafficking, and I think there's some implications that we're also dealing with a child porn ring in some sort of capacity as well, but they don't kind of explicitly say that. Maybe that's just a little too much for comic books. However, we've talked about another volume where they deal with a child porn ring as well, further on down the line in Chichester's run. Was it Chichester or was it after Chichester?
Now I can't remember. It feels like Chichester.
But so they're kind of, we're dealing with the same thing here. And Butch goes to tell Daredevil about this. And so he and Karen really feels invested in this case as well. So they go together to find the missing children. Karen feels this because of her history in Born Again, where she was lured into the adult film industry and really got into a bad mental state because of it. And so she's kind of picked her life up now since then, but seeing kids used in this way is, it's, of course she's going to feel like she's got to do something about it.
Yeah, it's nice to see them team up, and at the same time, they're teaming up to, try and find this girl. You have Typhoid Mary. First of all, she's now she's definitely in a relationship with the Kingpin. He's being manipulated. He can't stand anyone touching her but him. He's getting possessive, but she still feels like she's in control. She tries to look up a listing of foes, which made me laugh because apparently they're all heavies and they're all like losers. But okay, I feel like she got like an alphabetical list except for the Wild Boys, but
right,
or whatever they're called.
Wild
But
Boys,
yeah, but everyone else is just kind of a loser. But anyway, so she basically starts putting together a team because she's decided, she wants to really hurt Daredevil. She's tired of waiting. She wants to put the hurt on him, and then she wants to be able to swoop in. So she's going to put together a team to do this, where it means gathering together Bushwhacker, Bullet, Ammo. I don't remember Ammo at all, actually, but Bullet I definitely do, and I always really liked that character, so it's interesting to see him used. But putting together a team to kind of put together this massive beatdown on Daredevil.
Yeah. We can sense that something is building. This is very much a building type of issue, and things are leading up to a big finale. And Typhoid has a change in heart in this one. Not a change in heart, but she decides to tackle Matt in a different direction because Kingpin has been saying, go for the emotional part, because I've tried doing something physical. I've tried taking away the physical possessions and material possessions from him. That doesn't work. We need to attack his brain and his heart. But Mary tried that, and it's not going as fast as she wants it to, so she's like, I'm just going to take him out. Also, she's doing that because she knows that Mary is actually really, for real, falling for Matt, and Mary's trying to take control, so Typhoid's like, I'm going to take out Matt out of the picture before Mary has dominance over their brain. So very interesting to see how things are playing out here and how Typhoid is coming to these conclusions in her mind.
Mm-hmm. It's a great setup issue, that's for sure. I mean, it gets all the pieces in place for. It's weird looking at 260 and being like, why was this a giant size spectacular? Like, they just kind of picked a random issue and decided to put everything in it. Like, you would never see that these days.
It's
you
true.
Wouldn't just do that.
Yeah, it's not like it's a quarter century issue or anything like that. It's not the anniversary of Daredevil's debut or what. It's issue number 260. But they wanted a big splash. Okay, so hold on. Before we go on to that issue, though, when she goes to talk to Bullet's son is in an apartment, and he's preparing his apartment, like outfitting his apartment like a fallout shelter, because he's afraid of the nuclear war, the threat of nuclear war that's looming over the world at this time. And so he's got his vacuum sealed meals, and he's boarded up all the windows and such. And I think that's just such an interesting thing, that the Cold War paranoia that this little kid is facing, and all of the adults are telling him it's fine. And then Mary comes in and says, "Yeah, you know what, kid? You're right to be paranoid." And he's like, "I knew it. All of the adults were lying to me." I thought that was a nice. I don't know if Anne's trying to like poke fun at people or a certain group of people or whatever through this kid or something, but it's definitely something that was on people's minds at the time.
Absolutely.
Okay, the big one, issue number 260. It's called Vital Signs, and this whole issue is one brutal battle that is just all of the members of Typhoid's new team attacking Daredevil one at a time. First it's Bullet, then it's Bushwhacker, then it's Ammo, and then it's the Wild Boys. And then Mary kind of gets the finishing touch. And throughout this issue, we see the attacks, the unrelenting attacks of these villains taking its toll on Daredevil, and he's slowly getting beaten till at the very end he just can't handle it. It reminds me very much of when Morlun attacks Peter Parker in the Straczynski run, and JR is the artist on that too. But I got the same feeling. It's like, wow, this guy is just like, he's just unrelenting and pummeling our hero. It's just a non-stop force, and he can't get a break or have a chance to breathe or recoup. So of course, he's just going down. And I felt that way with Daredevil here.
Interesting. I had a very different. I actually found, well, first of all, the fact that he went through very much like the original Amazing Spider-Man annual, where Spider-Man slowly fights everyone in the Sinister.
No, hold on.
The big bad, the final boss, like getting hit by someone, and that person basically just leaving off and letting that person do it. So you felt like you had different stages, almost like a video game. And then the other thought is that this felt like a very condensed of what we would see years later in Batman Nightfall, where you have Batman having to go slowly up against all of his rogues in rapid succession, getting worn down by all of them. One just totally decimates them. So it reminded me more of those two in comparison, but I can see where you're coming from as well in terms of this unrelenting foe. I think the fact that you had multiple different enemies made me kind of go in different areas as opposed to just one force. And it's interesting too to see how messed up Daredevil gets and how no one cares. Like, he sees people all throughout New York, and everyone's just kind of not caring, not really being helpful. It's interesting too because it's in the middle of like these two giant marches that are happening. Again, I talked before about how Matt Murdock didn't always feel like Matt Murdock, but the beginning of this issue is actually the most Matt Murdock he's felt in the entire run thus far in this epic, because you have him making jokes and having kind of fun time with Karen, and I'm like, this is the character I remember, and then we're not going to see that for a long time.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I was going to make that note too. I think he's making these jokes, again, because he's overcompensating. He's especially making these jokes when he's around Karen. He's trying so hard to act different so that she doesn't suspect that anything's going on with him and Mary. And it's specific to those times. I really think that...
Because he didn't seem to care before.
Nope, he didn't care, but now I think he's gotten so serious. He's been trying to hide it, but now they're doing things out in the open and stuff, and so now when he's with Karen again, he feels like he needs to act a different way to cover up what he's doing or something. Like it's something that he's doing because he's nervous. You brought up Spider-Man Annual number 1 as something that this reminded you of, and I'm like, this is absolutely paying homage to the Spider-Man Annual number 1, not just because of the all of these foes attacking in succession, but also every time you had a foe, you had a huge splash page, and in some cases a double page splash page, just like Steve Ditko did in that annual with all of the villains as well. Every single one of these characters got that. And in that original, in that annual, you had a bunch of pointless cameos of other characters that popped up that didn't have any bearing on the story. Stan just wanted to promote their books. We have a pointless cameo in this issue as well. It's the Human Torch.
Well, it's yes, in and of itself, it does feel pointless. But given the following issue, feels less pointless.
Absolutely, I know that for sure. But just in the context of this issue, he comes in, has a look around, and then he leaves. He doesn't talk to Daredevil or help him out or see him or anything. So it does.
Daredevil's a pro; he'll be fine.
Oh yeah, that's right. He does see him, but yeah, he leaves him up to his own, and so he doesn't get involved. And that's exactly what happens in that Spider-Man annual as well. I did like some of the hallucinations Matt was having toward the end of this issue. One was with his dad, and I can't remember. Sometimes they portray his dad as being a real jerk and like really abusing Matt as a kid and stuff. Other times they portray him as being really loving, and it's like he is doing the boxing because he loves his son and doesn't know how else to care for him. I don't know which is the actual real or what is supposed to be the real interpretation of his dad, but this one they make him come off as the jerky character.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's both. I mean, he has been both, and I think also when the story dictates it. I mean, obviously this is all based on Matt's memory or his hallucinations anyway. So yes. I wouldn't put much stock in it anyway. It's just at this point, this is what he's seeing.
Yeah, that's right. I also like on the page before, we see a hallucination of Daredevil's rogues gallery, and it includes Kingpin and Typhoid and Elektra and Bullseye, and also Gladiator, who's like a Silver Age villain of Daredevil's, who I don't think gets a whole lot of love these days at all.
He shows up periodically, but never usually as Gladiator. Usually just as Melvin Potter, but he still makes his appearances.
I just don't think that I would consider him to be one of the characters I would stick in Daredevil's rogues gallery. But maybe up to this point, we don't really have anybody else.
Yeah, up to this point, I absolutely would. Especially because, again, Frank Miller brought him back and used him some more, and there's a lot of good stuff in there. So, I mean,
I guess that's true.
I mean, really, like, this is kind of a greatest hits of Miller, right? I mean, Miller did such great work with Kingpin, Gladiator, or Melvin, Elektra, and Bullseye. And then in here, you also have Typhoid as kind of the newcomer. So that makes sense.
I guess so. I guess you're right. Yeah, I forgot about Miller's inclusion of Gladiator in there. Yep, so that's kind of cool. Overall, do you think this was a good final battle? I guess like a big, because they've been really building all of these. I don't know, what did we just talk about? 8 or 9 issues to this point. Do you feel like it was warranted?
I do, because what I thought was interesting about it is it didn't just feel like it was Daredevil getting to this point, but it was Typhoid. Like, Typhoid needed to do this for herself. She needed to do this to stay Typhoid and not let Mary win. Yeah. So it felt like we'd had scraps between these two characters, and they were so sexually charged, and it was Typhoid, was playing with him, but now she can't play with him anymore because it's getting too personal. It's getting too close for her, so she really has to get rid of him so that she can stay who she is and not let Mary win. So I thought in that respect, it really worked well, because it wasn't just the hero, building up to their big battle. It was really the villain building to theirs and what she needed to do for her own preservation. So in that respect, I thought it was really well done. It's interesting that Typhoid herself barely fights him, but because she gets everyone else soften him up, which I thought, again, made sense for the character. So yeah, maybe you'd like to have a really big battle, final battle between Typhoid and Matt, but it actually meant more that she got everyone else to do it because she couldn't do it her own. She could barely do the final kind of dumping him off the bridge on her own to kind of squelch the Mary personality.
Maybe it's the fact that I read these at an accelerated pace. These are pretty quick reads. You can read these issues pretty fast. And I just felt, though, that this came really, really quickly. And maybe if I had been reading this only one issue every month and this had built up over the past 9 months, then this would feel different. But I just felt like, boy, we're just getting started with the relationship between Matt and Mary, and all of a sudden this is happening. I expected it maybe further down the road.
It would be fascinating as an experiment to get an epic and just read one issue from it a month, just to get the experience, because we're not meant to be consumed this way. They're meant to be consumed once a month, and sometimes once every 2 weeks, depending on the books. But it's just so interesting that we're so used to now consuming it at a pace, like you said, and we are, losing some of the effects because we don't have that lingering feeling of what's going to happen next issue, because you're going to get it right away. So it's just an interesting experiment to do. We would buy an epic and only read an issue a month, and it would last a long time.
It sure would, yeah. I love these last 2 pages with the skinny vertical panels where we see Matt falling and this single tear rolls down Typhoid's face to symbolize, I think, Mary's reaction to what's going on here. I thought it should have been on the other side, like not the painted side of Mary's face. Or Typhoid's face, I should say. But yeah, we have it here dripping off of her chin in the end here, and Matt falling to what we are to assume is going to be his death. But yeah, really nice way to end. We're going to end our episode right here on this cliffhanger, and I think this is a great place to stop because the next half of this epic goes in a very different direction.
Yeah, I can't go any more different than this.
But that's all we have for today, so I encourage you to read up the rest of this epic if you haven't already, and join us next week when we resume and talk about the rest of these issues. Thanks, Adam, for joining us again. Check out his podcast, comicshenanigans.podbean.com. Is that right?
That's right, but we can just find us on iTunes. It's probably easier. Just look it up under Comic Shenanigans.
And you can search for the Epic Marvel Podcast on social media and find us there, and join our Epic Collection group on Facebook so we can talk all about Epic Collections with you. We will totally enjoy you being part of our group. And that's all for this time. Thanks everybody for listening, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.